comes out and it's already, I mean, like I've had other writers and creators on that have been in like cultural zeitgeist moments. Like we had the creators of Blair Witch, which was like a complete, I mean, I had to ask him like, how did it feel being in the center of that storm? I have to ask you the same question. The negativity, I mean, it was a punchline. Waterworld was a punchline for a long time of being a flop and like, oh my God. And it was like an example of Hollywood excess and the powers of movie stars and all this stuff, which obviously none of this was your fault, but you get some of that blame. Some of that energy goes to you. What was it like as a writer and as a human being to be caught up in that?
Yeah, it was interesting, very intense, and amazing. It was amazing. I have to say that even the bad press was kind of exciting on some level for me because, as you said, it wasn't really my fault. It wasn't my fault. I created an idea and then it basically got taken over, and a series of decisions were made that I had nothing to do with, and here we were. On the other hand, it was being written about, in every newspaper, every
Around
country.
the world.
Everyone knew about that word, that title. It became part of the zeitgeist. It still is to this day. It has cult status. I still get residual checks, substantial residual checks every quarter from that movie 25 years later, because it kind of struck a chord of some kind. I mean, I think part of it, of course, is, the origin story, which is the flood myth. Every culture has a flood myth. And I was recently, someone was telling me, what that potentially was caused by, which is, there was a meteor strike potentially way back in the day, but it wasn't just one meteor, because it wouldn't have affected all these different continents. It was this huge rock that broke up and went bump, 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 bump. So it had a whole bunch of splashes and apparently, wiped out a lot of cultures, and hence the flood myth, the Noah's Ark, and every civilization has this myth. And I think the combination of that idea, which is probably baked into our DNA, and also this kind of obsession with post-apocalyptic movies, which everyone seems to have.
Well, and in today's world, not so much fiction anymore.
Exactly. In fact, I was invited to the United Nations to talk about Waterworld. We can talk about that if you're interested.
What? Please elaborate.
Okay. Not long ago, around 6 months ago, I got a call out of the blue from a National Geographic journalist who was saying, I'm organizing a roundtable at the United Nations to discuss the feasibility of floating cities. In other words, we're dealing with two crises at the same time, simultaneously: habitat loss, from rising oceans, and increasing populations. What are we going to do with, like, for instance, Bangladesh? Like, the ocean rises 5 feet, and that's millions of people displaced. But what are we going to do with them? Is it possible to create floating cities that are actually self-sustaining and could, blah, blah, blah? So they brought in a whole team of architects, a rock star architect from Denmark, and engineers, and they brought in a screenwriter, because basically the model that they created, the prototype model, looked exactly like the atoll, So here I was, talking to the Undersecretary General and a whole bunch of bigwigs about this idea, and it makes perfect sense that they should involve screenwriters. I'm going to tell you one little other anecdote that might be interesting to your audience, which is, I heard, in fact, I know some of the people that were part of this, that after 9/11, the National Security Agency created a writer's room of Hollywood screenwriters and said, listen, we want you to tell us what's next, because 9/11 was not a failure of intelligence. We knew these guys. We knew they were going to flight school. It was a failure of imagination. We didn't make that leap of faith that they would weaponize airplanes. What do you got, you writers who think about this stuff all the time?
Right.
So it's like, writers have a place at that table, which is thinking about the most incredible, implausible ideas that could actually help us in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I still remember days after 9/11. Like when the plane would fly by, I would have like literally have like reactions, physical reactions to it, and what we're going through right now with Corona and the COVID crisis. I promise you that the hangover, even after a vaccine and after this kind of goes away, which could be years, there's going to be a hangover of a generation
Yeah.
of people who are going to be like, I don't want to go to a concert. And that's something I've talked about ad nauseum on my other podcast as well, which is, how many people are really going to want to go back to the movie theater all the time? Like it's gonna. I'd love to. I'll throw that out to you just out of curiosity. I know I want to go. I want to go see Tenet in a big screen. I want to go see the next big Marvel movie or a big event film in the big screen, an IMAX or something like that. But you got to balance it out. Like, is it worth the risk? And even a year from now, even 2 years from now, it's gonna take a minute before you go back in. Like any trauma.